Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
My mother's voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard since my father almost left her for that woman in his bowling league. Low, pleading, and entirely unlike the iron-spined matriarch I grew up under. "Please just let him have this night," she whispered as she leaned in, her fingers grazing mine under the table with that same passive-aggressive gentleness she always used when she was asking me to betray myself in the name of family peace. I stared straight ahead at the tall centerpiece in the middle of the engagement dinner table, a ridiculous display of lilies and roses that smelled so overpoweringly sweet, I felt a headache forming in the base of my skull. The clinking of glasses, the fake laughter, the ambient jazz piped through overhead speakers. It all felt like a twisted simulation of what a celebration should be. And at the center of it all was my younger brother, Ethan, all charm and perfectly tailored arrogance, raising his wine glass with the effortless confidence of someone who's never paid the full price for anything in his life. I hadn't seen Ethan in 3 years, not since the day I walked in on him half-dressed in the apartment I shared with my fiancé, Tyler, trying to zip up his jeans while my best friend, my then best friend, Carla, pulled her shirt back over her head and stammered out the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard. I remember the way Ethan laughed when I screamed, like it was some kind of joke, like the entire world existed for his amusement. Tyler, of course, didn't last another week after that, and Carla, well, she vanished for a while, only to resurface a year later as Ethan's new girlfriend, and now, as of tonight, his bride-to-be. The kind of thing that makes people shake their heads and say, "God, you couldn't write this stuff." And yet here I was 3 years later, sitting at a goddamn vineyard in the Napa Valley, dressed in a burgundy cocktail dress that I didn't even like, pretending to be okay, pretending to be part of this family that had a knack for sweeping horror under the rug and calling it character building. Mom had begged me to come, called 3 times in 1 week, left voicemails that ranged from guilt-laden sermons to tearful confessions about her dream of seeing both her children happy and together again. Like some warped Norman Rockwell painting come to life. I agreed, not for her, and certainly not for Ethan. But because I needed to look that girl in the eye one more time, I needed to see what kind of woman could climb over someone else's life and call it love. Ethan was in his element, backslapping, joke-telling, holding Carla close like a prize he'd earned rather than a life he'd stolen. People loved him. Always had. He could lie to your face and have you thanking him for it. He'd been the golden child since birth. Mom adored him, Dad respected him, and I used to believe in him. He could do no wrong, even when he was obviously neck-deep in it. I once took the blame for him stealing cash out of Dad's wallet because he promised me a popsicle afterward. I was 10. He was 8. That moment was the start of a very long pattern. As the main course was being cleared, Carla stood up. She hadn't said much all evening, just smiled politely and played the role of glowing bride-to-be with practiced ease. But now, as she tapped her fork gently against the rim of her glass, I felt a shift in the air, like the crackling tension before a thunderstorm rolls in. Her hands were shaking ever so slightly, and her eyes scanned the room before they locked onto mine. There was something unsettling in that gaze, not regret, not fear, but something colder, calculated. She looked like someone about to jump off a cliff, but only after shoving someone else over first. I saw Ethan's head snap toward her, a little too fast, and for the first time all night, his grin faltered. That alone made my spine straighten. Carla cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper at first, but growing steadier with each word. "Before we raise our glasses," she said, her eyes still on me, "there's something I need to say. Something I can't keep to myself anymore." Time froze. You could hear the wind brushing the vines outside. My mom's hand gripped the tablecloth like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. Ethan opened his mouth, probably to crack a joke or shut her down, but she raised a finger and he shockingly fell silent. Now here's the part where I want to ask you, watching this, something honest. Have you ever been in a room where the air shifts so suddenly, so violently, that your skin actually prickles and your gut says something's coming before your brain can even catch up? What did you do? Did you stay silent? Or did you speak? Because I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Not because I didn't want to speak. God knows I had every reason to stand up and ruin that dinner myself. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because something in Carla's eyes told me I wouldn't have to say a damn thing. She was about to do it for me, and when she finally opened her mouth again, it wasn't just my night that shattered, it was Ethan's whole kingdom. For a few seconds after Carla spoke, there was only silence. Real silence, not the polite pause before applause, or the awkward moment between courses, but a suffocating stillness, the kind that wraps around your chest and dares you to breathe wrong. She stood with both hands clutching her glass like it might ground her to the earth, her gaze fixed now on the far wall as though afraid to make eye contact with anyone else. And for one brief, flickering moment, I wondered if she might just sit back down and pretend she hadn't said a thing. But she didn't. Her voice, when it came again, trembled less than I expected, and yet every word that followed was like a slow, deliberate knife through skin that had been healed over with scar tissue. "I can't start the rest of my life with a lie," she said, and immediately I saw Ethan's knuckles whiten as he gripped the edge of the table, the carefully curated grin from earlier dissolving into something tight, forced, almost sick. "I know this is supposed to be a celebration, and I know some of you came a long way to be here, but I made a promise to myself that if I was ever going to wear this ring," she held up her hand, fingers trembling now, "I had to come clean first, because someone else in this room deserves the truth more than he deserves this party." It was deliberate, that choice of words, not we, not us, he. Everyone caught it. You could feel it in the sharp intake of breath from my aunt on the left, in the subtle tilt of my dad's head as he finally looked up from his phone, in the hard set line forming across my mother's jaw. Ethan, for his part, was still trying to hold the pose, the frozen smile of a man whose life was beginning to unravel thread by thread in front of an audience. But he hadn't figured out yet if he should intervene or just let it ride. "I wasn't going to say anything," Carla continued, and this time her eyes swept the room slowly, pausing briefly on each face, as if she wanted to make sure her words left no one untouched. "But I couldn't keep lying. Not when the truth is standing." Her voice caught briefly, her eyes finally locking with mine, right here. And that's when I knew, not suspected, not wondered, knew this wasn't an ambush, this wasn't revenge. This wasn't about me, or rather, not just about me. This was a moment years in the making, a slow burn finally igniting, and she had chosen now, this exact night, this exact audience, to strike the match. "I didn't just meet Jesse," she said, and now you could almost feel everyone's eyes swing to me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. We were best friends. I was at her engagement party. I helped pick out her wedding dress. I stayed at her apartment more times than I can count. And then I slept with her fiancé. And worse, I kept sleeping with him even after she found out. I betrayed her. I betrayed our friendship. And she cut me out of her life completely, and she was right to do it. Now there was actual noise in the room, gasping, shifting, whispered, "What the hell's?" But I didn't react. I kept my back straight, hands folded neatly in my lap, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. Carla had just detonated a bomb, and somehow she was still standing in the center of the crater, looking calm, controlled, too calm. "I thought I could move on," she said. "I thought time would bury it. But time doesn't bury the truth. It just makes the silence heavier. And I don't want to live with that weight anymore. Not with Ethan, not with any of you." Ethan finally moved, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape against the hardwood floor, his voice cutting through the room like a switchblade. "What the hell are you doing, Carla?" he said, and the mask was gone now. No more charming fiancé, no more favorite son, just raw panic and fury beneath a paper-thin shell. "You think this is honesty? This is a goddamn hit job. This is my engagement dinner." Carla turned to him, and the look on her face was the first real sign that this wasn't just some performance. There was pain there, real, earned pain. "I know what this night is," she said softly. "But before anyone celebrates, they should know what they're celebrating. They should know who they're raising their glasses to." And then she turned to the rest of the table, lifting her glass slightly, and the next words out of her mouth hit me so hard I actually swayed in my seat. "Jessie," she said, "I didn't just come clean to clear my conscience. I came clean because you and I have been talking, and she deserves to finish what I started." Gasps turned into a low hum of confused murmurs. All eyes fell on me now, like heat lamps, like searchlights. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father's jaw clenched hard enough to crack his molars. And Ethan? Ethan looked betrayed, actually betrayed, as if the idea that I could have spoken to Carla behind his back was somehow a greater sin than him wrecking my life in the first place. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I kept my voice low, measured, almost bored. "Don't look so surprised," I said, raising my own glass, not in toast, but like a warning. "We all have secrets. Some of us are just better at hiding them than others." And that's when Carla sat down, exhaling slowly, her job done. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I wasn't going to stay silent tonight. Not for Mom, not for peace, not for anything. Because if Carla had opened the door, I was going to walk right through it. And Ethan, he wasn't going to leave this dinner with a fiancée. He was going to leave with nothing. The thing about family dinners, especially ones cloaked in fake smiles and painfully coordinated floral arrangements, is that it doesn't take much to tear the whole illusion apart. One wrong word, one exposed secret, and suddenly everyone at the table is reminded that they've been performing, not living. And tonight, with Carla's confession still hanging in the air like a noose above Ethan's head, the performance was over. You could almost hear it in the way forks clinked nervously against half-finished plates and wine glasses were suddenly drained faster than usual. Nobody knew what to say, and even those who'd come expecting a flawless engagement celebration were now staring at Ethan like they'd just realized the tuxedo didn't make the man. Ethan tried to recover, of course. That was always his first instinct. Charm his way through the storm, throw out a joke, flash a smile, change the subject with that smooth, slippery charisma he used like a weapon. But this time, it wasn't working. His voice, too loud and just a touch too defensive, cracked around the edges when he said, "All right, that was dramatic. Carla has always had a flair for theatrics, I'll give her that. But seriously, guys, can we just move on? Everybody makes mistakes. This happened years ago. Jessie, come on, you didn't really want this aired out here, did you?" He turned to me like I was supposed to play along, like I was still the big sister who used to cover for him in high school when he snuck out the back door to get drunk with his idiot friends. But I wasn't that girl anymore, and he damn well knew it. I looked at him, not with anger. Anger would have been too easy, but with the cold, detached clarity of someone who's finally tired of being asked to play the villain in their own story, just to keep the family's golden boy untarnished. So I took a slow sip of my wine, wiped the corner of my mouth with my napkin, and then I spoke. "Let me ask you something, Ethan," I said, my voice calm and steady, despite the chaos thudding in my chest. "When you decided to screw my best friend, was it just for fun? Or did you already know you were going to try to take her from me completely?" My mother gasped like I dropped a grenade in her lap, but I didn't flinch. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, more like a cough wrapped in panic. "Jessie, that's not— Look, I wasn't in a good place back then," he said, grasping at the same threadbare excuses he'd been using his whole life. "You and Tyler were already having problems. Carla and we didn't plan for anything to happen. It just happened," I cut in, finishing the sentence he'd probably used a dozen times before. "Like the time you stole $500 from Mom's account and blamed it on the cleaning lady. Or the time you forged Dad's signature to get out of a DUI and told everyone I helped you do it. It just happened, right?" The room had gone deathly quiet. My father's eyes were fixed on his plate, not a muscle in his jaw moving. My mother looked torn between standing up to scream at me and curling up under the table out of shame. But no one was looking at Ethan with admiration anymore. And he knew it. "You're dredging up ancient history," Ethan snapped, the mask slipping further with each passing second. "You're pissed about Tyler? Fine, I get it. You should be. But don't act like I ruined your life. You were already miserable before that. Don't pin everything on me." And that right there was the moment I realized he still didn't get it. He still thought this was about heartbreak or betrayal, about some grudge I was carrying because he slept with someone he shouldn't have. But it wasn't. Not anymore. "You didn't just ruin my relationship," I said, my voice rising slightly now, the weight of the years pressing against my ribcage. "You ruined my sense of trust. You made me believe that love was a trap, that family couldn't be trusted, and that forgiveness was just another way to let someone hurt you again. And worst of all, you did it without ever thinking about what it cost me. Because for you, consequences are things that happen to other people." Uncle Rob, who had been silent up until now, leaned forward in his chair, his heavy arms crossed over his chest, and his eyes locked on Ethan with something between disgust and amusement. "You're not mad she's bringing this up now," he said, his voice deep and clear, like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "You're mad because she finally has an audience." Ethan's head jerked toward him, his jaw tightening, but Uncle Rob didn't stop. "I told Elaine 15 years ago that if you kept letting this kid walk away from every mess he made, one day he'd blow something up too big to sweep under the rug. Well, here it is. How's the rug looking now?" I watched my mother's face contort into that same helpless expression she always wore when forced to choose between the child who made her proud and the child who told her the truth. She looked at me with tear-brimmed eyes, as if begging me to call the whole thing off, to take the high road one more time. But I didn't budge, because the truth wasn't done coming out yet, not even close. And when it finally did, it wasn't going to just scorch Ethan's perfect little image. It was going to take the whole foundation with it. If Carla's confession had cracked the surface, and my words had widened the fissure, then what came next was nothing short of a structural collapse, the kind that doesn't just leave rubble, but reveals just how long the rot had been spreading underneath the foundation, hidden behind well-dressed evenings, polite silences, and years of carefully choreographed family denial. There was a pause, a moment so still it felt unnatural, like the entire room was holding its breath. Not out of shock anymore, but out of a quiet, growing realization that what was happening wasn't just a sudden eruption. It was the long overdue eruption of a volcano they had all seen rumbling for years and chosen to ignore. And then Uncle Rob, who had always been the blunt hammer in a family full of velvet gloves, sat forward in his chair with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who wasn't surprised by the evening's trajectory. In the slightest, someone who had known, deep down, that the price of silence was always going to be collected, and tonight it had finally come due. He placed both hands on the table like a judge about to deliver sentencing and said, not with drama or flair, but with something colder, certainty, "That's not the half of it. There's more. A hell of a lot more." Everyone turned to him, even Ethan, whose confident posture was now visibly buckling under the pressure, though he still tried, pitifully, to maintain the illusion of control. "Oh, come on, Rob," Ethan said, his voice high and tight, almost brittle. "Don't start now. You've always had it out for me." But Uncle Rob didn't even flinch. "Don't flatter yourself, kid. I've had it out for liars, and you just happen to be the loudest one at this table." My father sat up a little straighter now, his brow furrowed, his mouth finally twitching into motion after nearly an hour of motionless silence. "Rob, what are you talking about?" he asked, and the tension in his voice told me he already suspected this wasn't going to be something he could walk away from with dignity intact. Rob turned to him and said, "Your son didn't just wreck his sister's life emotionally. He wrecked her financially, too. Ethan borrowed $30,000 2 years ago, told me it was for a startup idea. Something about an AI investment. Said it was all above board. I believed him, gave him the money. But then I found out the loan paperwork listed Jesse as a co-signer. The air was sucked out of the room so fast I could almost hear it. My head snapped toward Uncle Rob, stunned, because this was the first I was hearing about it. I opened my mouth to say something, to protest or ask for clarity, but he held up a hand and continued. I didn't know at the time, he said, voice calm, but now laced with something bitter. He used her social, faked her signature. The bastard opened a shell company in her name, defaulted, then ghosted the whole operation. I found out 6 months later when a collections agency called me asking about Jesse's liability. That's when I started digging. My mother looked like she'd been slapped, and for the first time all evening, her carefully constructed facade cracked open. Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking in a way that I'd never heard from her, not even when Dad packed a suitcase and threatened to leave years ago. Tell me that's not true. But Ethan had gone quiet now, and in that silence, I realized what true fear looked like. Not the fear of punishment or embarrassment or losing face, but the bone-deep, unshakable realization that the lies had finally caught up, and there was no easy joke, no charming deflection that could make this one disappear. Tell me you didn't use your sister's name to scam your own uncle, my mother said again, louder now, tears streaking down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from humiliation so sharp it looked like it was physically painful. Tell me you didn't ruin her credit and let her take the fall. Ethan didn't respond. He just looked down at the table, jaw clenched, eyes glassy, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but a cold, almost surgical clarity. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but steady. That's why I got denied for the mortgage, I said, the puzzle pieces slotting together with terrifying ease. That's why my credit tanked out of nowhere. You used my name, tanked the company, and just disappeared. Still, he said nothing. Carla stood again then, not shakily this time, but with the posture of someone who'd been waiting for her cue. I knew about the loan, she said, her voice calm, even, too even. I found the paperwork in his drawer 3 months after he proposed. I knew he'd faked the signature. I didn't say anything then because I thought I could fix it from the inside. I thought if I married him, maybe I could protect the people he kept screwing over. She turned to me then, and for the first time all night, there was no calculated coldness in her eyes. Just a sadness that came from having bet your soul on someone you knew you shouldn't trust. But it wasn't fixable, she said, and you deserve to know. Ethan finally snapped, slamming his fist on the table with a force that sent silverware jumping and glasses teetering. You think this makes you some kind of hero? He shouted. You're just as bad as me. You stayed. You helped me cover it up. Don't pretend like you're better. Carla didn't even flinch. She just looked at him with the kind of pity that hurts more than anger. No, Ethan, I'm not better. I'm just done. She walked out after that, slow and deliberate, without saying another word. And no one stopped her, not even my mother, who was now weeping openly, the sobs escaping her like years of willful ignorance finally catching up with her lungs. And I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and said, not loudly, but with enough force that it cut through the noise, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but I recorded our last call. Ethan's head snapped up, eyes wide, mouth open to protest, but he already knew. He knew what I had, and he knew what came next. Because I wasn't done, not yet. For a long moment after I pulled out my phone and let those words hang in the air, words that sliced through the layered silences and half-truths of the evening like a wire through soft flesh. No one moved. Not a single breath stirred except Ethan's, shallow and rapid, as he stared at the small device in my hand like it was some kind of weapon, which, to be fair, it was. And not just any weapon, but the kind that killed slowly, with precision, stripping away not just reputation or standing, but the very illusion of safety he'd spent years constructing with lies, manipulation, and a terrifyingly natural ability to twist the truth until it looked like loyalty. You wouldn't, he said finally, voice cracking with a false confidence that sounded more like a question than a threat. And for once, he didn't look like the charming younger brother or the golden child or the clever little bastard who always managed to land on his feet. He looked small, desperate, like a man suddenly realizing the stage he'd always owned was burning beneath his feet, and the audience wasn't clapping anymore. "Oh, I would," I replied calmly, my thumb hovering over the play button as I scrolled through the files, each one labeled with the kind of precision you only bother with when you know you'll need evidence later. When you know you'll need to show people, not just tell them, exactly how far someone went, exactly how deep the betrayal ran, and exactly why forgiveness wasn't just impossible but grotesque. "I told you I'd give you one chance to fix this." That call wasn't a negotiation, it was a courtesy. My father, who had remained largely silent until now, reached for his glass and downed what was left with the kind of hollow detachment that only comes from realizing. "Your idea of your own son doesn't match the man sitting in front of you," and the silence that followed was not a stunned silence anymore. It was something heavier, like grief, like people finally mourning the version of the family they thought they had, one funeral glance at a time. My mother looked at Ethan, then at me, and then back again, her face a collage of confusion, denial, and heartbreak. But she didn't say a word to stop me, not this time. And in that tiny surrender, I knew something in her had cracked beyond repair. She still loved him, that much was clear, what mother doesn't, but tonight had cost her something she could never get back. The fantasy that love alone could justify silence. I pressed play. The recording wasn't long, just under 2 minutes, but every second of it landed with the kind of weight you only get when a lie is exposed in its most raw, unfiltered form. Ethan's voice came through clearly, laughing, actually laughing, as he told me I was too sensitive about the credit fraud, that it was just a temporary move, and that I'd be thanking him when the business took off, as if stealing my identity and dumping the debt onto me was some kind of twisted favor, some long-term investment in our shared future, as if the moral bankruptcy was just a side effect of ambition. By the time the recording ended, you could have heard a pin drop. No one said a word. No one needed to. Ethan stood there, still, shoulders hunched like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds, his eyes scanning the faces around the table and seeing, maybe for the first time, not admiration or forgiveness or even indifference, but disgust, cold, undeniable disgust. Carla was gone, and with her went the last shred of social cover he had left. My mother was crying, my father looked like he didn't recognize the man he had raised, and Uncle Rob was already reaching into his coat pocket for his checkbook, muttering something about making things right with Jesse if it's the last damn thing I do. And me? I stood. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't scream or throw my wine in his face like a woman in a soap opera. Because this wasn't a performance for me. This wasn't a moment of victory. It was something far quieter and far more powerful. It was the end of pretending. "You had your night," I said calmly, each word landing like a slow beat of a drum in a funeral march. "You had every chance to tell the truth, to fix what you broke, to stop taking and lying and using people like chess pieces, and instead you smiled through it. You made jokes. You let everyone else carry your sins while you drank the wine and told your stories. But tonight, this was your last free drink." I walked to the edge of the table, placed my phone down like a mic drop, and turned to leave. But just as I reached the doorway, I paused, because I wasn't quite done yet. I turned back to my mother, her face pale and slack with the kind of pain that comes from realizing the child you defended for decades wasn't just flawed, but fundamentally cruel. "You asked me to stay quiet," I said, not unkindly, but without apology. "You begged me to let him have this night. And I did. I gave him every possible chance, but you can't build a future on silence and expect it to hold. Now look where we are. There were no rebuttals, no pleas, no last-minute appeals to family or unity or tradition. Just silence, raw and aching." As I walked out into the cool night air, my heels clicking on the stone path like a metronome counting down the last moments of a song that had finally, mercifully, come to an end. And as I reached my car, the engine humming to life beneath my hand. My phone buzzed, an unknown number, but I didn't need to guess. It was a lawyer, mine. Because yes, I had recorded Ethan's confession. Yes, I had exposed him in front of everyone. And yes, I was suing him for identity fraud, civil damages, and a whole list of charges he never thought I'd be brave or cruel enough to pursue. But here's the part you won't like, the part that gnaws at you after the credits roll. Carla had known, Carla had helped, and maybe, just maybe, we had planned it all together. Or maybe we hadn't. Maybe this was just fate catching up to Ethan in the form of two women he'd underestimated too many times. Either way, as I drove away from that vineyard, the last words of the night weren't spoken by me or Ethan or anyone at that